Hi, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. I'm Paige Niedringhaus, and today I am here with Aurora Sharf, a software engineer on the Next.js team at Vercel, here to talk about designing the in-between states with Async React. Welcome back, Aurora.
Hi, thank you for having me back here. This is very exciting.
There's been a lot happening with Next.js lately, so we are excited to have you here to talk about some of the new up-and-coming features. So let's just dive right into it. Can you tell us what you mean when you talk about designing for in-between states?
Yes, it's kind of, I guess, a weird terminology that I just decided to name my talk, but it's a nice way to summarize the problem that when you're doing something typically on the web and you have an interaction that a user is clicking something, you need to think about what happens between the click and the result of that click, which is like the in-between state.
So basically a lot of what the web is, to be honest.
Yeah, basically all of the web, you have to think about this, which is why the web is easy in a way, but it's also really easy to mess up.
Talking about clicks or maybe form submissions or loading states or things like that, why do you think that this is more of a UX problem than maybe a DX problem?
So typically you would encounter this in different parts of the stack. If you're like in GitHub, you might have felt that you're navigating around and it doesn't really respond that quickly. You might have thought that GitHub is slow. And in most cases, the apps are not usually that slow, but if you have just a progress bar at the top or something that isn't localized, that's when you feel that the app is slow, even though the server is responding quickly. So the key here is really local feedback.
You know, as a developer, if you're doing some local development on your web application, because your database might be right there and your apps are all running locally, It's not necessarily an issue. But as a user caching from a CDN from somewhere in the world, probably going to be a little bit slower.
Yeah, and then there's also the other side of this, where if you're building in a client-side React app, everything is already a client, and you're used to adding loading states, but then maybe you don't think so much about how you're doing it. So even though you have something happening, it might not be the best experience for the user, and it might feel jittery or weird, or the user might not even know why it feels not great to interact with your app.
So what are some of those unmanaged states that can show up between maybe the event, the render, the commit, when async can come into play?
So you're probably familiar with the React render cycle. You click something and then React will re-render the result of whatever it needed to do and then commit that to the DOM. And that's pretty simple when it's sync. But once you have async, you get these gaps in between all of those parts of the render cycle, which is the unmanaged states between event, render, and commit. So this is where you typically get this janky experience.
And what can go wrong when people handle these states with useEffect and useState and some of kind of the boilerplate hooks that React provides?
UseEffect isn't really the main problem. It's just that we don't really coordinate the asynchronous work that we're lacking inside of the states that appeared now because of the async work in the render cycle. So you have like this loading, that's fine. But if you're doing asynchronous work, you're calling APIs, maybe they would come back in a different order. You might have race conditions. And this is where it typically is not enough to just do useEffect and useState. And we don't really have a built-in way in React to handle this before 19. But now with Async React, there's a way to coordinate this out of the box.
Can you talk a little bit more about how that coordination works?
Yeah, so the idea is that when you're using transitions, which were introduced first in 18, but also now in 19 for asynchronous work, you can wrap whatever interactions you want to coordinate in a transition and then have React handle the coordination of that automatically. And this is the key for coordinating the async work, but then you have additional primitives that are part of Async React to fill the gaps in the render cycle. For, let's say you're clicking a button, you want typically to show something right away. That could be a loading state, or it could be an optimistic value. So you have useOptimistic to fill that gap. And then you're probably familiar with Suspense, but Suspense lets you fill the gap of when you're loading the data. And then finally, they also introduced view transitions, which are not yet stable, but that's a way to animate the done state of those interactions.
Nice. So you talked a little bit about the different ways to manage it, but do the states disappearing on fast networks, like I know when I'm debugging, I can slow down my network calls to kind of get to those in-between states, but Does it matter on fast networks how you design for them as well?
Yeah, so what's really cool about Async React is that because it's coordinated with transitions, it's very resilient to whatever networks conditions you're on. So, of course, you need to think about the worst case, which, I mean, it's not really that bad. It's just any time you have some latency, you're going to feel it because there's like this threshold, I think 100 milliseconds, where even if it's not really that slow, but it feels delayed if your click is not responding instantly there. So you need to almost always think about this, right? But when you do have a very quick connection, it will just feel synchronous because it's all batched together and responds as if it was a sync interaction.
So you touched briefly on Suspense, but how do Suspense and maybe the cache components work together within the Next.js app router?
Suspense and cache components is two different topics, where Suspense is a React feature that we already had for a while. And then cache components is a relatively new model that we have in the app router. So some of the background of this is that in the app router, caching used to be really confusing. So we had the fetch cache, router cache, data cache, all of these different caches. It was a meme, actually. So you would like build an app and then deploy it, and suddenly you don't know why. Things felt stale. You didn't know how to make it fresh. Mm-hmm. So what we've been trying to do is reverse that to be more of the natural developer mindset, which is that it's the opposite. It's uncached and it's just fresh data by default. So we have this thing called cache components, which flips that default. And in cache components, nothing is cached unless you define it to be cached. So it's a lot easier to work with. And then you would rather opt in to caching when you need it. So we have one directive, it's use cache, and then APIs to handle validation and freshness, which is cache tag and cache life. So this is our latest investment, and we really want to make the app router a good experience.
So can users or developers actually set different cache lengths for different pieces of data within an application?
Yeah. Any function or component, you would be able to define a cache life, how fresh it's going to be, and then also tag it with something inside of that scope and then revalidate it, for example, on an interaction. So it's a very small set of APIs. It's a bit different if you're not used to it, of course, with anything that's new, but it's a lot simpler than what we've had before, I think.
Nice.
Another thing we encountered when we were transitioning to this model is that it's really easy to make mistakes still if you're blocking some sort of the page on some data. That's also been a complaint before. So we're working on adding the developer tooling missing to make this easier. We just actually launched the 16.3 preview 2 weeks ago, which we have features like instant insights, which will show you where you're doing something to hurt the performance of your app and then give you very actionable patterns to fix it. So far, there's been pretty good feedback and it's really nice. So it's really the missing piece to make all of this easier to learn and to reason about.
So that was another thing that was tripping developers up, is that they would potentially cache things that really shouldn't have been, or vice versa.
Yeah, they would make the wrong choice, or they just wouldn't know where they were missing something. So we have basically 3 different options. You would stream it with Suspense, which I guess we didn't talk much about yet. We can get back to that. But you can stream a piece of data, or you can cache it so that you don't have to wait for it, or you can acknowledge that you want it to be slow. But that's like an opt-in, basically.
Got it. Do you want to talk a little more about the streaming option?
Yeah, so Suspense is a React feature, right? Which you can use for a bunch of different things, not only with App Router. Typically, people might have used it for like lazy loading things. So it has a bunch of different triggers like async server components or like the use API. And App Router is like a Suspense first, transition first framework. So we're very tightly integrated to this new React model. So whenever you're loading data, you would typically load it on the server with a server component and then use streaming server-side rendering to incrementally show more and more of the page with Suspense.
So there's something called the action props pattern. Could you talk a little bit more about what that is and how it works?
So the action prop pattern is something that was formalized more with the Async React talk at ReactConf last year. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of us have been seeing these features like the transitions, the useOptimistic, and it hadn't really been like a coherent story. We didn't really know how to use them. So that was very important, at least for me who was researching this, a very important talk to understand what was the intention behind all of it. The idea is that in React 19, you can run a function in a transition, which is what I talked about earlier. And then that would be, it has a terminology, which is an action. So that means that you get a lot of things under the hood, optimizations or coordinations built in. So you have the pending state, you get error handling, and then you can easily handle optimistic updates And this goes further into the fact that you can expose these as properties from design components or any component library that you might be using so that you can get this behavior built in and even have the design system define how your sprinters look like, because it's a design concern. It makes sense to have it in the library. That's the goal, at least. It's a pattern that's been formalized and now is possible to add into open source libraries.
So are you seeing this being incorporated into libraries like Radix UI or Base UI or anything?
So this is actually very interesting. I know that previously there wasn't much adoption, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm also hoping to contribute more to help make that easier. But just, I don't remember when, maybe last week, there was this new component library by Meta, like Astrix. And they actually do use this pattern. So you can use, for example, in a toggle button, you have a press change action so that you can easily get all the benefits of Async React without building this by yourself. So it's a missing piece to the suspense and the transition. So you have like data loading with suspense, and then you have routing with transitions, and then you have actions in the component libraries. And it requires adoption, of course. So it's going to be interesting to see how this continues to be implemented in libraries. But it's really cool to see that they're adding this.
Yeah, the Meta new framework that they just open sourced called Astrix, they say it's been running 13,000 apps within Meta. So that seems like a pretty good indication that it's pretty battle tested. We'll see if people get onto it and want to adopt it for their own applications.
Yeah, I was actually making a PR there because I was like, hey, they're not using cache components. We should make this better. So we made a PR and then it got merged, and then now their docs page is faster. So that's pretty cool. So I guess we're kind of also collaborating a bit now with how to use our stuff to make their stuff better.
That's very cool.
So that's fun when you have like real world adoption. Yeah.
Do you actually get to contribute much to the React code base or to the Meta code bases with working on Next.js?
It was like very random. I was like, hey, what is this new framework? I want to see if I can try this, because we were really working on developer tooling recently for Next.js.
Yeah.
And I built a skill to automatically use cache components in your app, because it's a flag. You have to like do some refactoring. And I was like, oh, I need to try more apps with this. And it was like the perfect case. So it's nice to be able to automate these processes, because of course most developers want their migrations to be like easily to do now with AI.
So that skill, that sounds like something that would be useful to other developers. Are you planning to open source it or provide it somewhere that people can opt in?
Yeah, it's a part of our preview. So you can use it today if you want to try out cache components. Highly recommend it. It should be a really good experience now, at least if you tried it before and you weren't super happy with it. We're really working on the developer tooling and making it approachable for developers.
It seems like skills have become the new way to do code mods for a lot of code bases too.
Yeah. So it actually uses a code mod as well. So the skill calls the code mod so that your agent doesn't have to manually put 500 lines of code. That would be a bit of a waste of your token budget, I think. So it's fun to experiment with and see how we can improve developer tooling.
Are there other skills that have come out of this exploration?
Yeah, we're still figuring out what's the best way to help developers use Next.js with agents. So we have a lot of improvements that we're working on. So skills is just like one of those things. And definitely going to be seeing more of that as we want to automate typically migrations or specific or optimizations. We have some skills for that to make your app faster or the perceived loading state faster.
Cool. So one question going back to the transitions and animations and things like that is, how do transitions make it safe to interrupt a navigation mid-flight?
So transitions are a feature from concurrent rendering, which has been in the works for a while in React. And navigations in frameworks like Next.js are already transitions. So that means that React will do whatever work is at the transition in the background at a lower priority without really committing anything, and then keep whatever you're doing mounted. So that if you go somewhere else, you can just throw away that in-progress work and you still have a responsive and smooth page. And when you do want, so basically if you have a navigation and then let's say you click to a page and then you change your mind, you can click to a different page and it's not going to block you on whatever page you clicked first. So it will just throw away the work. So this is like a feature of view transitions that lets you do routing in a smoother way.
Nice. In your opinion, is there a time when you should use view transitions or when it's just like extra animation noise?
Right. So let's get to view transitions. This is confusing also because they're both called transition. But view transitions are animations, right? That React created this component built on the Vue Transition API, which is like a React way to make animations with this. Of course, it's using components. So it's a component that you can wrap around your components. And it builds on Async React. So when you have some sort of interaction that is async, you can coordinate it with a transition and then finally add an animation at the end of that coordination. So you can think of like in iOS, you have like a slide between pages, or you have a morph between, let's say, a photo in detail or a photo in full screen. So these are really nice ways to add meaning to your different parts of your app. And the way you would add this where it's not noise, typically it's really nice if you have a suspense reveal. You can animate with a crossfade or some sort of effect to make that smoother when your data loads in.
Mm-hmm.
Or, as I said, you can swipe between pages. Or even when an item moves in a list, when you're doing filtering, it's a very natural place to put animations. So all this is very easy with Vue transitions.
And another thing that was touched on was useOptimistic and using it for handling rollbacks. So can you talk a little bit more about what that is? Because that's a hook that people might not be as familiar with, and then when you would use it.
Yeah, so I kind of sped through it earlier, but it's like the hook that lets you add instant feedback to your async interactions when you coordinate with Async React.
Mm-hmm.
So think about a like button, or you're on Twitter and then you want to like or save a tweet, or you're going to expect to click it and instantly get that feedback, even though the server is not done processing that change. So this is the very typical place where you want optimistic feedback, because it's very unlikely that is going to fail. And another really cool thing about useOptimistic is that it coordinates multiple actions. So typically if you're in React and you're clicking, let's say you're increasing how many items are in your cart. If you click that many times, maybe there would be some race condition happening. Whereas with useOptimistic and some of the other features, you can provide instant feedback on the clicks and then have that all coordinated and settle as one update in the end. So for the rollback feature, it's a bit different than what you might be used to with something like React query. If you have the optimistic queries there, where you basically store a copy and then you put it back. Whereas with useOptimistic, it's just a temporary state that you keep for a certain time until or while the async work is happening, like inside your transition, how long that is running. And then it will just get rid of that afterwards. So whatever you're left with after that fake, you could say, UI is like the true state, right? So you don't have to roll back anything. It's just like settling into what's the result of the interaction.
Are there any where you would not want to use this type of optimistic update?
Yeah, so at least with something like useOptimistic, it's a hook. It's like a localized component thing. It's not a global. It's a bit different from maybe React query in that sense. So anywhere where you have an action that is most likely to succeed, you can throw it in there. But if you're doing like an irreversible delete or you're navigating away from something, it's really hard for you to roll back to that state, right? Basically, if it's something that's likely to succeed and it's not destructive. Yeah.
Got it. So another thing that you talked about in your talk was routing background updates through transitions and how that makes things like polling features feel free.
Yeah. When I did this demo at React Miami, I just wanted to showcase some cool animations and background updates. And what's nice is if you're using transitions and you have the router, you can just call a refresh in a transition and have that happen in the background in an interval. So it's a very simple way to just get this background update if somebody else is manipulating the same UI. And it looks really nice with animations, because if you have a view transition around those items and then they appear animated, it feels really alive, even though it's very simple code, right? It's just checking if there's something new.
Yeah.
Real apps, when you're doing something that's really real time, probably you wouldn't use that. You would probably do a client fetching thing or a data library like React Query or SWR to actually have it like a proper live, or WebSockets even.
Yeah. One thing that you said was that teams should think about perceived performance versus actual measured performance. So INP versus CLS. What do you mean when you describe that?
When we're designing in between states, like we've been talking about here, that makes the app feel faster for your user, because you're giving them this localized feedback, you're making it responsive. But a lot of the time that is also improving your actual performance. So typically core web vitals, you said INP, responsiveness, you would be improving that. And for the largest contentful paint, if you're using streaming with Suspense, you might get a better LCP also because you can reveal parts of the UI as they become ready.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, if you are doing streaming, you also have to think about CLS or cumulative layout shift, because for sure, a lot of people have gone to an app and then it just feels awful. You're not sure where to click because things are like jumping around.
Yeah.
Or you're clicking a button and then it moves and then you click the wrong thing. It's just the absolute worst, right? If you're doing any sort of loading state, even in a spa or without Suspense, you still have to think about how do you design your loading state to avoid cumulative layout shift.
And these patterns and things that you're recommending people keep in mind, do they work outside of Next.js?
Oh, yeah. So these are like React features, but we do integrate with them very tightly in Next.js because we believe in React's model. We want to work the way to go in the direction that they're going, but you need a router that runs navigations through transitions, and then you need a data layer that works with Suspense, which a lot of frameworks are doing. And Next.js kind of leans all the way into this. There's also other ways to solve these same problems, of course, but that's the way we have decided to go, where we're like following this declarative model of React. Another thing that I forgot earlier was maybe about the actual performance of server or running on the server instead of on the client. So when you're using Suspense and you can stream, you get to keep your data fetching on the server, right? Mm-hmm. So you can ship less JavaScript, but it is also a lot faster to fetch on the server. And there's been some really interesting benchmarks around this, which was like, I think it was a throttled app by Nadia Makarevich. She's done some really nice benchmarking where I think here, based on what I've been reading, it was like 4 times faster actual performance when you load on the server and then you stream it. And what's nice is that you get to keep this declarative localized React model where you can fetch data inside your component while still getting the speed. And you get to also integrate with Suspense so that you can make nice loading states that are not causing CLS and have a intention behind them.
So do you think that's where the industry is headed at this point? More server side when possible, but client side just in specific instances?
That's a really hard question because we used to be building apps on the server, and then for like 10 years we did spas because they feel nicer to use, they're fast, they're interactive.
Right.
And people like them, and that's fine, but I don't think that should stop us from innovating and trying to make what's better, because it's a bit boring if you're like, oh, this is fine, we'll just keep doing this forever. When there might be a better way, you just have to find the right balance first. So it's already, a lot of frameworks do this with loaders, and server components is one way that gets you more benefits of the server. Yeah, it's a very interesting shift, I think, and we should keep on innovating here.
So what is still missing from Async React, do you think, before it becomes the default way that people will build React apps?
I think a lot of what's been missing recently is documentation and maybe education, I guess, because it's been a lot of hooks that you've seen maybe in the React docs in the API reference, but that's kind of hard to understand how to use it in your app. And that's been a lot of my goal too, to just help people learn how to use this stuff. So hopefully I'll get to contribute more to this. And there's this Async React working group, which anybody can help contribute to this movement of getting Async React more educated and into apps. Mm-hmm. And it's really nice to see Astrix doing the action props pattern as the first real library to showcase that this is possible. So it's more about slowly implementing it and teaching it and making sure the docs are there.
So if people are interested in getting more into this, what kind of things would you recommend for them, like documentation to go check out or videos, or where can they learn more?
Well, I would first just recommend realizing that there are more things to learn, because React is really great and it works perfectly the way it already is, but it's also a good idea to kind of research what's next and watch the new talks and check out the Async React from ReactConf and maybe try the hooks and hopefully just stay up to date on what's happening. Yeah, it's very exciting. It's exciting when we're working in a framework where it's still innovating. You shouldn't take that for granted.
No, and it seems like it might even start innovating faster now that it's become part of the React Foundation and is out from under Meta, just Meta by itself.
Yeah, I don't know much about that, but I'm very excited to help make it better.
It's been great talking to you, Aurora. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure people or listeners are aware of when it comes to Async React and everything that we've just talked about a little bit?
I'd love for everybody here to just check out what we've been doing recently in Next.js, because we are really working hard on making it better for everyone, and hear your feedback. So we have some discussions on that. That would be great, and improve it before the release.
Awesome. If people want to get in touch with you or find out more about React and Next.js and what's coming down the pipe, what are the best places to find you online?
I'm very active on X. You can follow me there. And I also respond on LinkedIn, but maybe a bit slower. Yeah, I think that's my most active. And I have a blog, but that's like for seeing what I share. But if you want to talk to me, I'll be on X.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great talking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.